Maria had always lived with quiet strength. She was not the type of woman to make her struggles known to the world. Most of her neighbors in the small town where she lived only saw her as a hard-working single mother who took care of her little boy and did small jobs to earn enough for their survival. But behind that strong face, she carried a story that very few people knew, the story of love, betrayal, and survival. Years ago, Maria had been in love with Daniel. He was charming, ambitious, and he made her believe that they were going to build a future together. Everyone around them admired their relationship. Daniel would often tell her that no matter what happened, he would always stand by her side. For Maria, those words were enough. She trusted him with all her heart, never imagining that the promises would one day shatter. When Daniel proposed to her, it was one of the happiest days of her life. Maria remembered how her hands shook when he slipped the ring onto her finger, and how her heart overflowed with dreams of a shared future. They planned their wedding, spoke about children, and even discussed how they would grow old together. Maria believed her life was finally falling into place. But soon, reality struck in a way she could never have imagined. A few months into their engagement, Maria found out she was pregnant. At first, she was nervous, unsure of how Daniel would react, but deep down, she believed he would be happy. After all, they were engaged, and a child was only a step toward the family they had always talked about. When Maria told Daniel, she expected joy, or at least support. Instead, she saw fear flash across his face. He hesitated, then tried to smile, but something in his eyes made her uneasy. From that day forward, his behavior slowly began to change. He became distant, sometimes irritable, and often avoided her. Maria tried to remind him of their plans, their dreams, and the love they once shared, but the more she tried, the farther he drifted. Until one day, Daniel finally told her what she had never thought she would hear. He said he wasn't ready to be a father. He said marriage was not what he wanted anymore. And worst of all, he left her, choosing to walk away from both Maria and the unborn child. It was the most painful chapter of her life. Maria was left alone, not just as a broken-hearted woman but as an expectant mother who had to find the strength to move forward. In the months that followed, she experienced loneliness she had never known before. Yet, in the middle of her tears, there was one reason that kept her going: the little life growing inside her. When her son was born, Maria held him close, and in that moment, she felt both love and determination like never before. She named him Samuel. From the day he arrived, Samuel became her world, her reason to wake up, and her courage to face whatever challenges life threw at her. Raising a child alone was not easy. Maria had no luxury, no one to lean on, and very little income. She worked tirelessly, taking up odd jobs, sometimes cleaning houses, sometimes helping at small shops, and sometimes working in catering events where long hours tested her patience. Every penny she earned went into feeding Samuel, buying his clothes, and saving for his school. People in town would sometimes gossip. They whispered about how Daniel had left her and how she was left to raise a child without a husband. But Maria had learned to walk past those whispers with her head held high. She no longer cared about what people said, because her only focus was Samuel's future. Over the years, Samuel grew into a bright, cheerful boy. His laughter filled their little home with joy, and his innocence reminded Maria that life could still be beautiful despite the past. Whenever she watched him play or listened to him ask endless questions about the world, Maria felt proud of the choice she made to continue, to fight, and to never give up. But as happy as she was with her son, Maria could never erase the shadow of her past completely. Every now and then, when she saw couples walking hand in hand, or when she passed by a wedding celebration in town, a quiet sadness would touch her heart. She remembered the promises Daniel had once made, the dreams she had once held, and the life that had slipped away. She never allowed herself to cry in front of Samuel, but at night, when he was asleep, she sometimes sat by the window, staring at the stars, wondering why life had chosen such a path for her. Daniel, meanwhile, had moved on. He became part of a wealthy circle, attending high-end gatherings and building connections that Maria could never imagine. Occasionally, Maria would hear about him from others, how he was successful, how he was admired, and finally, how he was about to marry again. Each time she heard his name, her heart tightened. Not because she wanted him back, no, those days were long gone, but because the past still carried scars that time had not completely healed. Maria reminded herself daily that she had to be strong for Samuel. He was growing, and he needed her love and guidance more than anything. For him, she was both mother and father. She became the one who encouraged him when he struggled with homework, the one who cheered for him when he played football, and the one who stayed awake through the night when he fell sick. Through all these years, Maria's heart hardened in one way but softened in another. Hardened against betrayal and heartbreak, but softened toward kindness, motherhood, and hope. Life had not given her the fairy tale she once dreamed of, but it had given her something more valuable, a reason to live with strength and dignity. Still, she could not have imagined how her past and present would soon collide in the most unexpected way. She had no idea that the man who once abandoned her would soon reappear in her life, not by choice, but by fate. And she could never have guessed that in the middle of humiliation, a stranger would step forward and change her story forever. The morning of Daniel's wedding was filled with noise and celebration. The town was buzzing, especially because Daniel was marrying into a wealthy family. People spoke about how grand the wedding would be, how many guests had been invited, and how it would be the kind of event that people remembered for years. Maria knew all about it. In a town this small, news traveled fast, and she couldn't avoid hearing about Daniel's wedding. Each time the subject came up, she tried to change the conversation or quietly walk away. She told herself she didn't care anymore. Daniel's choices were his own, and she had long stopped expecting anything from him. Still, deep inside, it hurt that while he was stepping into a life of luxury, she was still struggling each day just to make ends meet for herself and her son. That very morning, Maria had been asked to help with catering for the event. At first, she didn't want to go anywhere near the wedding. The thought of being in the same place where Daniel would stand with his new bride made her heart uneasy. But she also knew she couldn't afford to refuse. Samuel's school fees were due in a few weeks, and every small job counted. So, with a deep breath, she accepted the work, telling herself she would just stay in the background and do her duty. When she arrived at the venue, the sight was breathtaking. The grand hall was decorated with flowers in every corner, chandeliers hung high above, and music floated in the air. Expensive cars lined up outside, and guests in elegant clothes walked proudly into the hall. Maria felt out of place in her simple catering uniform, but she reminded herself she was not here to belong, she was here to work. She kept her head low and focused on the trays she carried, moving from one table to another, serving drinks and snacks. For the first hour, everything seemed fine. Most people didn't even notice her. To them, she was just one of the many workers in the background. But then, whispers began. Someone recognized her. A woman at one of the tables leaned over to her friend and whispered, "Isn't that Daniel's ex? The one he left years ago?" Her friend's eyes widened, and soon the whisper passed to another group. In just a few minutes, the news spread across the hall like wildfire. Daniel's former fiancé, the mother of his child, was inside the wedding. Maria felt the shift in the air. Wherever she walked, she could feel eyes following her. Some were filled with curiosity, others with judgment, and a few with pity. She tried to ignore it and continued working, but it was impossible to pretend she didn't notice the stares. Her hands trembled slightly as she carried another tray. It didn't take long before one of the bride's relatives approached her. It was an older woman, dressed in an expensive gown, her chin raised high with pride. She looked at Maria as if she had no right to exist in that place. "What are you doing here?" the woman asked sharply. Maria swallowed, her voice soft but steady. I am part of the catering team. I'm only here to work. But the woman didn't believe her, or perhaps she didn't care. She turned to the nearby guests and said loudly enough for others to hear, imagine the audacity. She came here to spoil this wedding. What a disgrace. The words cut Maria like a knife. She wanted to defend herself, to explain that she was simply trying to earn money for her child, but the crowd was already murmuring. People nodded, some frowned, and a few even glared at her. It was as if they had already decided she was guilty. Soon, 2 men from the staff were called over. The older woman pointed at Maria and ordered them to take her out. Maria tried to speak, her voice shaking now. Please, I didn't come here for anything else. I only came to work. I don't want trouble. But her words fell on deaf ears. One of the men took her by the arm, not harshly but firmly, and began leading her toward the exit. Her face burned with humiliation as dozens of eyes watched her. Some people whispered, some laughed softly, and others shook their heads as if she were some unwanted intruder. As she was pulled outside, Maria's heart sank. She felt small, powerless, and broken all over again. She had worked so hard to move past her history with Daniel, and yet here she was once again being defined by that past. She hadn't wanted to be noticed, but now all attention was on her for the wrong reason. Outside the hall, the music of celebration could still be heard faintly, but for Maria, the world felt silent and cold. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she quickly brushed them away, not wanting anyone to see her cry. She thought of Samuel. If he had been there, she would never have allowed herself to show weakness. For him, she always tried to be strong. But in this moment, standing outside the place where her past was celebrating without her, she felt her strength slipping away. Memories flooded back: Daniel's promises, his smile, the day he left, and the nights she spent alone with her newborn baby. She thought she had healed from those wounds, but this incident ripped them open again. The humiliation was not just about being dragged out, it was about being reminded that in the eyes of many, she was nothing but the ex-fiancé who had been left behind. The catering manager came rushing out, clearly embarrassed. He apologized to Maria, explaining that he hadn't known about her past connection to Daniel and that the family had insisted she leave. He handed her a small envelope with payment, though the work had not been completed. Maria nodded silently, accepting it without a word. She didn't want to argue. She just wanted to go home. As she stood near the gate, waiting for her transport, she watched the guests continue to arrive, their laughter echoing from inside. She felt invisible, like the world was moving forward while she was stuck in the shadows. But what Maria didn't know was that her story was not ending here. As she stood there, wiping away her quiet tears, someone had noticed her. Someone who was not like the others, someone who had watched the whole scene unfold inside the hall. A man who would soon step forward, not with judgment, but with unexpected kindness. For now, Maria only knew the weight of shame pressing on her heart. She held the envelope tightly, whispered a silent prayer for strength, and thought of Samuel waiting at home. She told herself she would survive this, just as she had survived everything else. But deep inside, she wondered how much more her heart could bear. Little did she realize that destiny had already started moving in her favor. Maria stood outside the wedding hall, clutching the small envelope of money in her hand. Her eyes stung from holding back tears, and her chest felt heavy with shame. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the ground so no one would see her pain. She thought of Samuel waiting at home, and she told herself she had to stay strong for him. But in that moment, strength felt like a faraway thing. The laughter and music from the hall floated through the air, mocking her silence. Every sound reminded her that she had just been pushed out of a celebration that could have once been hers. She lowered her head, trying to steady her breathing, when suddenly a calm but firm voice broke through her thoughts. "Are you all right?" Maria lifted her head quickly. Standing a few steps away was a tall man in an elegant suit. His dark hair was neatly combed, and his eyes carried a mixture of concern and quiet strength. She recognized him as one of the guests she had seen earlier inside, though she didn't know his name. He didn't look like the others, who had either ignored her or judged her. His expression was different. It was kind, curious, and gentle. Maria hesitated before answering. "I'm fine," she said softly, though her voice trembled. I just need to go home." The man studied her for a moment, as if he could see through her words. "I saw what happened inside," he said. "The way they treated you was unfair." At those words, Maria felt her throat tighten. She had been holding her pain inside, but hearing someone acknowledge the injustice almost brought the tears rushing back. She turned slightly, not wanting him to see her weakness. "It doesn't matter," she whispered. "I'm used to it." The man frowned gently. No one should be used to being humiliated like that. For a long moment, there was silence between them. Maria kept her eyes on the ground, while the man seemed to be thinking about what to say next. Finally, he extended his hand. "My name is Adrian." Maria blinked in surprise. She wasn't used to strangers introducing themselves to her in such a respectful way. Slowly, she nodded. "Maria," she replied quietly, though she didn't take his hand. She wasn't sure if she should trust anyone from this wedding. Adrian didn't seem offended. He let his hand drop gently and continued, "I know you don't want to be here. But you don't deserve to walk away like this as if you did something wrong. Would you allow me to walk you back inside?" Maria's eyes widened in shock. "Back inside," she repeated. "No, no, I can't. They don't want me there. They already made that very clear." But Adrian's gaze was steady. "They humiliated you for no reason. If you walk away now, they win. But if you walk back in with your head high, no one will dare whisper again. Let me stand with you." Maria shook her head, fear rising in her chest. The thought of facing those eyes again, those whispers, was unbearable. "I don't want to cause more trouble," she said. "I don't belong in that world." Adrian's voice softened, but it carried an authority that made her pause. "Dignity doesn't belong to a world of wealth or status. It belongs to every person. And you have every right to keep yours." For the first time, Maria looked directly into his eyes. There was no mockery there, no pity, only sincerity. She didn't know who Adrian was, or why he cared, but something in his voice made her heart steady. Still, she hesitated. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." Adrian gave a small smile. "Sometimes it doesn't take years to know when someone is being treated wrongly. I can't stand by and watch it happen. That's all." His words struck something deep inside Maria. For years, she had faced the world alone, carrying the weight of her struggles in silence. She had stopped expecting anyone to stand beside her. And now, here was a stranger, offering not sympathy but respect. Slowly, almost reluctantly, she nodded. "All right," she whispered. Adrian gave her an encouraging smile and held out his arm. This time, after a brief pause, Maria placed her trembling hand on it. Together, they turned toward the entrance of the hall. When they walked back inside, the room fell silent. Heads turned, eyes widened, and whispers spread quickly again. But this time, the sight was different. Maria was not walking in alone, looking fragile and unwanted. She walked beside Adrian, who carried himself with quiet power. His presence demanded respect, and his calm confidence silenced the gossipers. The same older woman who had ordered Maria out earlier looked stunned. She opened her mouth to speak, but Adrian raised his hand politely, stopping her before she could utter a word. His voice was steady and commanding. "This lady is here to work. She was treated unfairly, and that is unacceptable, Adrian said firmly, his words carrying across the hall. If she is not welcome, then perhaps you should also consider whether guests like myself should remain. The room grew tense. No one dared to argue. People knew Adrian. He was not just any guest, he was a respected businessman, someone with influence and wealth. His opinion carried weight, and no one wanted to risk offending him. Maria stood quietly by his side, her heart pounding. She couldn't believe what was happening. For the first time, instead of being dragged out in shame, she was being defended publicly. The older woman forced a tight smile, clearly uncomfortable. Of course, there must have been a misunderstanding, she said quickly. She can stay. Adrian nodded once, his eyes steady, and then guided Maria toward a quieter corner of the hall. There, he said softly. Now you can finish your work without anyone troubling you again. Maria's lips parted, but no words came out. She felt overwhelmed by gratitude, confusion, and disbelief. Finally, she whispered, "Thank you. I don't know why you did that, but, thank you." Adrian smiled gently. "You don't need to thank me. I only did what was right." For the rest of the evening, Maria continued her work, but everything felt different now. People no longer whispered when she passed. Some even looked away, embarrassed by their earlier behavior. And though she kept her head low, she felt a quiet strength returning to her heart. Every now and then, she caught Adrian watching her from across the room. Not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but as if he was simply making sure she was all right. Each time their eyes met, he gave her a small, reassuring nod, and she felt a strange sense of safety she hadn't felt in years. When the evening finally ended, Maria gathered her things and prepared to leave. Outside, the cool night air brushed against her skin, and she breathed deeply. She thought she would walk away from this day with only shame, but instead, she carried something new, a spark of dignity, a reminder that kindness still existed. As she turned to leave, Adrian approached her again. "Do you have someone to take you home?" he asked. Maria hesitated, then shook her head. "I'll manage," she said. Adrian nodded thoughtfully. "At least let me make sure you're safe. The night is late." Maria wanted to refuse, to keep her walls up, but something in his voice made her pause. For once, she didn't feel like a burden. She simply felt seen. And so, Maria's life, which had been filled with loneliness and silent battles, was about to shift in a way she had never imagined. She didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of a chapter that would change everything for her, for Samuel, and even for the man who had just stepped into her story. The days after the wedding passed quietly for Maria, yet the memory of that night stayed with her. She often replayed the scene in her mind, how she had been dragged out, how the crowd had stared, and then, how Adrian had stepped forward when no one else did. It wasn't just his words that stayed with her, but the calm authority with which he spoke, the way he stood beside her as though she mattered. Maria was not used to that. For years, she had faced life alone, building a wall around herself. Trust was something she rarely gave, and kindness from strangers was something she almost never experienced. But Adrian had left an impression on her heart that she couldn't ignore. A week later, Maria was helping at another catering event when she saw him again. She was carrying a tray of glasses when a familiar voice greeted her. "Maria," Adrian said with a gentle smile. Her hands froze for a moment before she looked up. "Mr. Adrian," she said politely, trying to hide her surprise. He chuckled softly. "Just Adrian, please. I don't like formalities." Maria lowered her eyes and nodded. "Adrian." He noticed the hesitation in her tone but didn't push her. Instead, he asked, "How have you been since that night?" Maria adjusted the tray in her hands and gave a small smile. "Busy, as always. Work doesn't stop." Adrian studied her for a moment. And your son? Samuel, isn't it? Her eyes widened slightly. You remember his name? Of course, Adrian said. You mentioned it briefly when we spoke outside. Children are never details to forget. Maria felt something stir in her heart at those words. Most people in her life avoided talking about her son, as if he were a reminder of her failed past. But Adrian spoke of him with respect, as though Samuel was not a mistake but a blessing. From that evening onward, Adrian began to appear in Maria's life more often. Sometimes it was at events, sometimes by chance in the town market, and sometimes when he simply reached out to check on her. He never forced his presence, but it was always there, calm, steady, and sincere. At first, Maria remained cautious. She answered politely, but she kept her distance. She had lived long enough to know that not all men who seemed kind were truly genuine. But Adrian's actions slowly chipped away at her doubts. One afternoon, Maria was walking Samuel home from school when she heard someone call her name. She turned to see Adrian stepping out of a sleek black car. Samuel's eyes widened in excitement at the sight of the shiny vehicle. "Is that your friend, Mama?" Samuel asked, his small voice filled with curiosity. Maria blushed slightly. "He's someone who helped me," she replied carefully. Adrian walked over with a warm smile. "You must be Samuel," he said, crouching down slightly to meet the boy at eye level. "Your mother talks about you." Samuel grinned shyly. "Really?" "Yes," Adrian said with a nod. "She tells me how smart you are. And I can see it already." Samuel beamed, his cheeks glowing with pride. Maria watched quietly, her heart softening. Adrian spoke to Samuel not like a stranger talking to a child but like someone who truly cared to know him. That day, Adrian offered them a ride home. Maria hesitated, but Samuel's excitement was hard to resist. Inside the car, Samuel asked endless questions about the buttons, the windows, and the comfortable seats. Adrian answered each one patiently, laughing gently at the boy's curiosity. Maria sat in silence, observing, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time: comfort in another's company. As weeks turned into months, Adrian's role in their lives grew naturally. He never imposed, but he always found small ways to help. When Samuel needed books for school, Adrian quietly bought them. When Maria struggled to manage 2 jobs, Adrian offered to connect her with someone who could give her steady work. Maria resisted at first, feeling guilty about accepting help. But Adrian reassured her with kindness. "You're not taking from me," he said one evening when she tried to return the money he had given for Samuel's books. "You're giving me the chance to do something meaningful. Let me have that." Maria stared at him, speechless. She had always believed that needing help was a weakness. But Adrian made it feel like an exchange of humanity, not charity. Slowly, trust began to build between them. Maria started to share small pieces of her past: the dreams she once had, the struggles she faced after Daniel left, the nights she cried alone while holding her newborn son. She never told these things to anyone, but with Adrian, the words flowed naturally. He listened quietly, never interrupting, never judging. When she finished, he would simply say things like, "You're stronger than you realize," or "It's not weakness to feel pain. It's proof you're human." Maria found herself looking forward to his presence. It wasn't just because of his wealth or status; those things hardly mattered to her. What mattered was the respect he gave her, the way he made her feel seen and valued, not as a broken woman but as someone worthy of dignity. Samuel, too, grew fond of Adrian. He often asked if they could visit him, or if Adrian would come to watch his football games. And Adrian always tried to be there, cheering from the sidelines with genuine enthusiasm. One afternoon, after a game, Samuel ran to Maria and whispered, "Mama, I like Adrian. He makes you smile." Maria's cheeks warmed at her son's words. She hadn't realized how often she smiled around Adrian until Samuel pointed it out. But even as happiness began to creep into her life, Maria carried a quiet fear in her heart. She had been hurt once before by someone she trusted completely. What if it happened again? What if Adrian, like Daniel, decided one day that she was too much of a burden? Adrian seemed to sense her hesitation. One evening, as they sat together on a park bench while Samuel played nearby, he said gently, "Maria, I know you carry doubts. You've been through things no one should have gone through. But I want you to know I don't see you as a burden. I see you as someone to admire." Maria blinked back tears. His words touched her deeply, but she still found it hard to believe. "I don't know if I can ever trust fully again," she admitted. Adrian nodded, his voice soft but firm. "Then let me earn it, step by step. I'm not here to rush you. I'm here to walk with you." In that moment, something inside Maria shifted. For years, she had only walked alone, shielding herself from disappointment. But now, for the first time, she felt she didn't have to. The bond between them grew slowly, built not on grand gestures but on small moments of kindness, honesty, and respect. Maria didn't know what the future held, but she began to allow herself to hope. And hope was something she hadn't dared to feel in a very long time. Ime moved forward, and with it, Maria's life began to change in quiet but powerful ways. She was still the same hard-working mother who woke up early to prepare Samuel for school, cook simple meals, and worked long hours to provide. But now, her days carried a new light. Adrian had become a steady presence, not only in her life but also in Samuel's. He visited often, always respectful, never demanding more than Maria was ready to give. With every passing week, his actions proved that his kindness was genuine. He wasn't interested in impressing her with wealth or grand gestures, though he could afford them easily. Instead, he showed his heart in simple ways, listening when she needed to talk, showing up for Samuel's school events, and treating her with the dignity she had been denied for so long. At first, Maria had feared the whispers of society. She knew people in the town talked about how Adrian, the successful millionaire, was seen spending time with a single mother who had once been abandoned. But the whispers didn't shake Adrian. If anything, he stood taller beside her, as if daring the world to question his choice. And slowly, Maria stopped caring about those whispers too. One evening, Adrian invited Maria and Samuel to dinner at a quiet restaurant. The place wasn't grand or crowded, but peaceful, with soft lights and gentle music. Samuel, sitting beside Maria, enjoyed every bite of his favorite meal. After dessert, he excused himself to look at the fountain outside, leaving Maria and Adrian alone at the table. It was then that Adrian looked at her, his expression steady but tender. "Maria," he began, "I know your heart carries scars. I know you've been hurt, and I can never erase that pain. But I want to be part of your story, not to fix you, because you are not broken, but to walk beside you in whatever comes ahead." Maria's breath caught in her throat. She had waited for words like these once in her life, but they had never come from Daniel. And now, after years of loneliness, she was hearing them from someone who had already proven himself with actions. "Adrian," she whispered, "I don't know if I deserve," he gently interrupted, shaking his head. "Don't say that. You deserve happiness, respect, and love as much as anyone else. More than anyone else, perhaps, because of all you've endured." Tears gathered in Maria's eyes. She had been strong for so long, but in that moment, she allowed herself to feel vulnerable. She nodded, unable to speak, but her silence spoke louder than words. From that night, their bond deepened. Adrian didn't rush her, and Maria didn't force herself to be someone she wasn't. They let their connection grow naturally, brick by brick, with patience and honesty. Samuel, too, blossomed in Adrian's presence. He began to look at him not just as a friend but as a father figure, the kind of steady guide he had never known. Months passed, and one spring morning, Adrian surprised Maria and Samuel with a visit. He arrived with a gentle smile and asked if they would accompany him somewhere special. Curious, they agreed. He drove them to a beautiful garden just outside the town, a place filled with colorful flowers and soft green paths. Samuel ran ahead, laughing and chasing butterflies, while Maria walked slowly beside Adrian, admiring the beauty around her. It was there, under the shade of a blooming tree, that Adrian turned to her. "Maria," he said softly, "the first time I saw you, you were being treated unfairly. That night, I promised myself that if life gave me the chance, I would stand by you not just for a moment, but for as long as you would let me." Maria's heart pounded as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it, revealing a simple but elegant ring. "I don't ask you to forget your past," Adrian continued. "I ask you to let me be part of your future. Will you marry me?" For a long moment, Maria was speechless. Memories of her past engagement flooded her mind, the broken promises, the abandonment, the pain. But then, she looked at Adrian. He wasn't Daniel. He wasn't making empty promises. He had already proven his love not just with words but with actions, over and over again. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." Adrian's face lit up with relief and joy. Samuel, who had been watching from a distance, came running toward them. "Mama, did he ask you to marry him?" he shouted, his eyes wide with excitement. Maria laughed through her tears and hugged her son tightly. "Yes, Samuel. He did." "And you said yes?" Samuel asked eagerly. "Yes," Maria said again, smiling. Samuel clapped his hands and jumped with joy. "Does that mean I can call him Papa?" Adrian knelt down, his voice filled with warmth. "Only if you want to, Samuel. But I would be honored if you did." The boy threw his arms around Adrian's neck, and in that embrace, Maria saw the future she had once thought impossible, a future where her son would grow up with love, security, and a father figure who truly cared. The wedding was simple but filled with meaning. Maria didn't want a grand hall or a lavish celebration. She wanted something honest, something that reflected the journey she had walked. Surrounded by close friends and Samuel's laughter, Maria walked down the aisle not as the woman who had once been dragged out of a wedding, but as a bride cherished and respected. Adrian stood waiting for her, his eyes never leaving hers. As he took her hand, Maria felt a wave of peace wash over her. This time, the promises were not empty. This time, love was not a dream but a reality she could trust. In the days that followed, Maria often reflected on her journey. She thought of the nights she cried alone, the days she worked until her hands ached, and the moments when she believed happiness was not meant for her. And then she thought of Adrian, the stranger who had seen her pain, who had stepped forward when no one else did, and who had chosen to love not just her, but also her son. Life had been cruel once, but it had also given her a second chance. She realized now that sometimes, humiliation is not the end of a story, it can be the beginning of a new one. As Maria stood in her new home one evening, watching Samuel play in the yard while Adrian prepared dinner inside, she smiled softly. Her heart, once heavy with scars, now beat with hope. She had lost much, but she had gained even more. And for the first time in years, Maria whispered to herself with quiet certainty, "I am happy."